So last time we spent what seemed like a very, very long time getting these chambers cut out of the body. It all went really, really well. We removed about 1 kilo of material. So this body is starting to get a little bit on the light side, but we're not going to panic just yet. There's obviously a lot of hardware is going to go on the body, and of course we wouldn't be able to do anything if we didn't put a top on it. And that's what I'm going to be doing in this episode. I'm going to be taking the 2 pieces of timber that I've got for the top, joining them together and moving that along in the right direction. But before I do that, I'm just going to say I've been taking quite a lot of stick recently in the comments about my bench cookies. Someone said they've been in the oven too long and I've burnt them. They got covered in black paint a little while ago on my last build, but also, I mean, these cookies have been with me for over a decade now, and as you can see, pretty much all of them have been in contact with a jigsaw or a router or some kind of cutting implement over that time. They still work okay, they just don't look very good. So when Mrs. Shed said to me a few weeks ago, is there anything you would like for Christmas? I was struggling a little bit. I'm generally very content and have most of the stuff that I want. And then I thought I could do with some new bench cookies. So bless her, she's not just bought me some bench cookies, she's bought me the whole kit and caboodle. Got kind of like the entire setup here. So I just thought I'd run through this very quickly and show you what I've got. Big bag of stuff, a bag of things. And 2, count them, packs of bench cookies. However, these are slightly different from the old ones because these, they've got, one side has got the normal gripping material on, as does the other, but it's a donut and it's got a hole in the middle that lets you access a little threaded insert, which means you can attach these little doohickeys, which will then fit into the dog holes on your bench, meaning that if you want to, you can not only kind of very firmly locate stuff because they're not going to slide anywhere no matter what, but also kind of elevate stuff up off the bench, which is really handy if you are doing some routing or something and you don't want the cutter to kind of go beyond your workpiece and into your bench. So that's really good, and there's some smaller versions of that too. And then these are little adapters that you can use if you're painting something, because they've got a very, very thin little point on them that you can rest your workpiece on. You can paint one side, flip it over, paint the other, and the theory is that little dimple in the middle that it's resting on isn't really going to leave too much of a mark in your paint. Anyway, so that's new bench cookies. I've now got a choice. I can have nice new shiny ones if I'm doing something where I don't want them ruined, or I've got some pre-ruined ones for other jobs. I think looking at all this, I might need a storage solution for them as well. That'd be a nice little job, wouldn't it? All right, anyway, let's crack on with the build. And basically, what I need to do, at least in the first instance, is to get these 2 bits of wood joined together, down the middle obviously, in such a way that we're not left with a honking great big gap like we've got at the moment. Now, this material is a little bit thicker than I actually want. If I get some calipers on the job, I'm looking for about 6mm on this top, and we're currently just under 9. We're at 8.7. So there's a little bit more material than I need here. However, in places there is a little bit of cupping, which is not ideal. And what that means is, if I were to run this through the planer, I would have to either fasten it down onto something very, very securely so that it's going through flat and we take that material off flat, or I plane it in such a way that I take that cupping out physically. Now, I'm not completely convinced I've got enough material to plane that cupping out. So what I propose to do is join this together, turn it into a top, get it cut out, get it fastened onto the body, do all the work we need to do so it's firmly glued onto the body. I can make sure that I take that cupping out, because it will flex when I glue it down onto the body, so that in effect we'll have the top on nice and flat but too thick. At that point I can then kind of take off the excess material, and that will be a job for the trusty hand plane. It's probably an hour's work to get that off, but I think it's probably the safest way to do it. I would love to have a much better planer thicknesser that could perhaps do the job for me and not kind of take so much material off that I'm left with a super thin top. But unfortunately that just isn't the case. You might also be able to see that this has been kind of cut at an angle, so the grain isn't perpendicular to the center line, it's kind of off at a jaunty angle. I chose that on purpose. I think this blank was designed for a flying V, and that's why it's got the angle in, but I kind of quite like it like that. And we'll put it on so that the grain is kind of angling towards the back end of the guitar. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is get this to the point where we can glue this centre line up, and for that we're going to need to do some planing work. And if you haven't seen me do this before, I'll just very quickly explain how it works. I'm going to put both of these pieces of timber in the vise in this orientation. So basically I've got the two top surfaces that I want are to the outside. I'm going to plane them with my number 6 plane because it's nice and long, until I've got a nice straight edge on both of these pieces. Now, doing it this way means I don't have to worry about what angle is on these edges. If it's 90 degrees and they fit together perfectly that way, brilliant. If it's a little bit out, it doesn't really matter, because what happens is when you then flatten them down like that, the two discrepancies, should they exist in the angles, will cancel each other out, and you should, in theory, get a board that lays down absolutely perfectly. I've done this any number of times and it's always worked for me really, really well. So, get them lined up nicely. So I'm taking off the absolute minimum of material. Get them in the vise. So just get them clamped together. And just bang a clamp on there. In fact, I'll put those the other way so they're not in my way. I've backed the plane iron right off. I'm just going to get a bit of wax on the sole. And just start advancing that until I start to get a cut. And I'm just going to kind of go at this until I get a nice full shaving off both sides. Okay, and that actually didn't take very long at all. It's nice and soft, this material. It was bought as maple. It feels a little bit like sycamore, but who knows, I could be wrong about that. We'll just lay those down and we'll see how we've done. And we're not bad. We're not too bad at all. We've got a little bit of a hump in the middle though, so I'm going to put these back in the vise and we'll just try and straighten them up a little bit. Okay, I've been backwards and forwards with this a few times now and I've got it down so that there's a good joint along virtually the whole length of it. There's a little bit here at the end where it opens up a tiny little fraction, but I'm not really concerned about that because I'm going to be kind of taking my material mainly from this middle section. So the joint through, if I just kind of mark that, the joint through those sections that will be on the top is really tight, so I'm very happy with that. So the next trick is to get this glued up, and to do that we're going to need a little bit of a jig. And it's not a particularly complicated jig, it's just one sheet of MDF, a little strip of 6mm MDF, some pins and some weights, and that is literally all we need to do this job. And I'm going to put a bit of masking tape down the centre of this just to stop anything sticking together. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to place that strip of wood in the middle there. I'm going to place our first board on it, and then I'm just going to knock a row of pins in along its edge. Don't have to be too many. It's literally just enough to stop it moving. Then we'll do exactly the same with the other board. Then what should happen is, when we take our stick out, this isn't, it's just a touch too small for the two bits of wood. So as you force them down with our heavy weights, you're actually forcing them together in the middle and closing up that joint, which it seems to have done really nicely. So I'll just get these weights off again. Get this set up. Drop a little bit of tight bond on. You really don't need much. Stick them back in the jig. Hang our weights on. And there we are, all joined together. And you can probably see there that there's enough pressure in there to squeeze out even what little bit of glue we did put on there. So it looks like we've got a nice tight joint all the way along. So we'll leave that for a few hours to set up and get back and move on to the next stage. Okay, so this has been left overnight now, so simply a case of getting these weights off. Never thought I'd get a workout while I was down here today. No, not everyone's got these dumbbells at hand. I've used bricks before and it worked absolutely fine. And that joint looks to be really, really good. This has popped up a little bit in the middle. Perhaps I might have been better just putting the dumbbells straight down the middle, but it's only a couple of mil and it does flex back down again very easily, so I'm not really concerned about that at all. Like I said earlier, there is quite an amount of material that needs to come off this to get it how we need it, so that's fine. But from there we should just be able to take that out of there. Just whip these nails out. And the board can be used for something else now, as long as I don't mind a few nail holes in it. So I'll just do a little bit of clearing up, get this out of the way, and then we can look at the next steps. And the first thing I want to do with this is just to clean up along this central joint so we can see what we're dealing with, because we need to find the best position on this timber that we can to make sure we're getting the most out of it. So I'm just going to stick my bench stop in and find a suitably sharp card scraper. Just use that to take off any glue residue and also take down any unevenness between the two bits of wood. And that's the joint done. I'm going to kind of hand hold and run down there. Hopefully you'll be able to see that that is a very nice tight joint. Obviously the figure in the wood is giving away where the joint is, but the joint itself is pretty much invisible. I've deliberately left that little bit at the end there so you can see where the joint actually starts. And I think this is important because that is as good a joint as you're going to need on something like this, and it's been achieved with a cheap number 6 hand plane, a bit of wood, a few nails and some weights. And I think, to be honest, the most expensive thing I used in the whole process was the dumbbells. They were way more expensive than anything else that I used to get this joint, so that is looking absolutely spot on. I'm very happy with it. I'm going to have to actually draw the centre line back in with a pencil now so I can see it for when we do the next bit, which is to lay out where we want the body to sit on this. And to get this shape, I'm just going to use this chambering template that we made, because it's got the big holes in, which will allow me to see which is the best area to be using. And I'm going to bring it back down this way as much as I can. Now there is this kind of band of slightly different coloured material on the edges of this blank, and if I kind of brought this as far forward as I could, I would only just be getting into that. But actually some of the nicest figure is around this area, so I want to bring that back as far as possible, like that. I can mark my starts and my stops, and then what I'm actually going to do is I'm not going to use the template, I'm going to use the body itself, because the way I cut these out means that there might be some very slight differences. But I know that the body is the absolute spot on shape of the body. And I think with that drawn on, you can perhaps get a feel for what it's going to look like. And I think it's going to look very, very nice. So the next step on this is to get the top cut out roughly on the bandsaw, just somewhere near the outline that we need. And before I get this glued on the top, I obviously need to cut out my F-holes. But I think that's all going to be a little bit too much for this episode, so I'm going to leave this one here. As always, don't forget to hit that like button if you've enjoyed this. Subscribe if you haven't already done so. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.